your heels together 3 times. And think to yourself, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
There's no place like home.
Home. That place that our main characters love trying to find, return to, and protect. Whatever the particular flavor of home might be for our protagonist, it oftentimes is one of the defining parts of their goal and identity alongside those who reside in their home, their family. Usually, media and narratives tend to reflect on the people that they are being made for more than the people who are making them. So it's no surprise that as human civilizations became more and more settled in one location over centuries, the presence and idea of homes in mainstream media have become increasingly static and homogeneous. Most depictions of the home in relation to the protagonist tend to be quite positive, something to cherish and protect, stable and filled with loved ones. It's also often assumed that our protagonist does in fact have a place to call home in the first place. When interpreting a narrative, these are the kinds of assumptions we often make about the home and what our protagonist may think of it. It's why when Dorothy says, "There's no place like home," we believe her. We don't need to see much of her life at home to assume that. But what about those who don't have a home, or perhaps don't want to return home? In the vast spectrum of the human experience, the idea of home is not something that can be so easily pinned down. One of the main focuses of this video will be to dispel the mythology of the home as a safe, good, and stable place. These basic assumptions can be incredibly misleading or harmful to many groups of people that don't align with them. The groups of people I will be focusing on in this video are migrant men in Cowboy Bebop, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and Avatar The Last Airbender. Migrant men in particular suffer from this type of malalignment and lack of representation in mainstream media, since often their relationship with the home is ever-changing and complicated rather than a simple positive force. I say malalignment instead of misalignment because it's less of a difference in equal options and more that there is something wrong with these men. Migration and immigration are some of the largest stressors you can put on a home. Like, you aren't just gonna suddenly lift up your home, put it on wheels, and place it back down with everything still intact. Migration changes the dynamics of the home, for self-evident reasons and more complicated ones. This topic is incredibly dear to me because after watching mainstream media for over 20 years, something never felt right to me whenever people were so excited to return home. Not to say that it was all negative for me or what have you, but it was always, well, more complicated. Rather than seeming like a disembodied talking head, I want to make it clear what my voice is in this conversation, because I feel like it would be disingenuous to not state my biases and whatnot. I am the second son of a first-generation Asian American family. For some of you, that statement seems normal, but I think others will recognize how loaded it is. That's the intersection I'm at. As a first-generation Asian American, I didn't live close to any of my extended family, so the concept of family and home was strictly confined by the 4 walls of my American household. Meeting extended family was less a happy reunion of relatives, but more a business meeting with strangers who I shared a last name with. If someone who looked kinda like me said their last name was the same as mine, I would just look at my parents and see if they nodded along. My life at home was complicated and generally focused on results. I didn't get along with most of my immediate family as my goals for myself went directly against what they had intended for me. I suffered greatly from gifted kid syndrome and faced a lot of pressure wearing the last name that I had. I'll spare the details of it because it can be pretty unsettling, but just know that home wasn't a place I necessarily wanted to go back to. The concept of home and family is just really complicated for migrant men as it was for me. It's not as if migrant men don't care about home or family, or that these ideas are always more negative. It's just a lot more convoluted than that. There still is generally great importance placed on family for them, but it becomes much more nuanced than the simple assumptions typically made in mainstream media. This can lead to differences in the performance of masculine norms and what we call hegemonic masculinity. I argue that these differences are what force migrant men to negotiate their identity and masculinity in a new and unique way. I don't want to spend too much time going over the ever-changing concept of hegemonic masculinity as well as toxic masculinity, since this video isn't really about that, so I'll just keep things short with this. The traits of hegemonic masculinity often stem from some sort of ideology of what a man should be. This can involve simply being strong for the sake of proving one's worth, or the problematic nature of hegemonic masculinity to be about subordinating women. The main aspect of this ideology I want to focus on is related to strength, but mainly utilizing the strength expected of a man to protect one's home and family. So, with that being said, and the fact that homes and families of migrant men are often much less stable and more complicated than that of the hegemonic man, I argue this forces migrant men to develop their own negotiated masculinity. The stories of migrant men are predicated on how they negotiate their own masculinity in order to find purpose and identity for who they are as they openly navigate the world with very little grounding them. Because hegemonic masculinity was never an option for them. The first piece of media I want to cover is the one that is closest to hegemonic masculinity. This is just to give some perspective on what the small changes are between hegemonic and negotiated masculinity are, before I get into the bigger variants later on.
I think it's time we blow this thing. Get everybody in the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
From the first episode, Cowboy Bebop makes it incredibly clear what its world is all about. Everything seemingly revolves around booze, babes, and bounties in the hyper-capitalist, futuristic space world of Cowboy Bebop. While many things have seemingly changed in this future, one thing has remained the same: the patriarchy. In order to navigate the world of Cowboy Bebop, each character has to find a way to exude some form of masculinity alongside whatever other identity they may carry. Most characters present some sort of outward toughness, whether with their appearance, behavior, or occupation. The world of Cowboy Bebop requires some amount of masculinity in order to truly navigate and deal with the dangers of the world. And despite all of the technological advancements and wondrous new ways to explore space, the main characters of Cowboy Bebop, like many others in the show, are dirt poor, even though they have a ship to call their own. Things around them are constantly breaking and, well...
肉のないチンジャオロースなんてな、チンジャオロースとは言わねえんじゃねえのかな。いや、言うね。言わねえよ。金がないときは言うんだよ。
Beef in some special beef and bell peppers were something of a luxury for the main characters on the Bebop. These hardships and the necessity for money paint the perspective of what Spike and Jet migrate for. They are wanderers looking for anywhere to work, or rather, get bounties. Understanding why migrant men choose to migrate is essential for understanding their purpose and identity, which will further develop their negotiated masculinity. In his book about migrant men and hegemonic masculinity, Mike Donaldson highlights how oftentimes the concept of breadwinning is essential for the identity of men, and how often, during the journey of migration, the traditional gender roles become more equalized between men and women. Both men and women typically participate in some share of housework and breadwinning in order to function. This often leads to these men having lower self-esteem and leads to what Donaldson describes as a form of exaggerated masculinity. These men typically end up working harder and for longer hours than normal for the sake of earning admiration and respect. This is partially because, and this is going to sound horrible, these men want to do tasks that women can't do. Jesus Christ, you can blame Donaldson or gender roles or whatever, but leave me out of it. However, for Spike and Jet, there is no family present, at least physically, throughout the majority of the show. There is a certain feeling of found family between the main characters, but all of them keep their respective distance from one another. The past is a topic strictly forbidden by everyone, especially between Spike and Jet.
あんたのその腕どうしたよ。何の関係がある。ないな。勇気はないってことか。お互いにな。
While existing as mere bounty hunters whose main goal in life is survival, I believe that Spike and Jet exude a particular type of exaggerated masculinity, one where their actions speak for their lack of words. The aesthetic of Cowboy Bebop is really highlighted by these types of fight scenes because, well, come on, they are functionally working as cowboys while fighting to bebop-style jazz. It's the name of the show. This aesthetic is essential for showing how Spike and Jet navigate the world as bounty hunters, futures cowboys in a sense, and emphasizes that often when push comes to shove, these are the type of men who fight, chase, and capture people, all for the sake of money. Right? Well, that's how they behave most of the time, but that's not who they are, at least not in their entirety. Hegemonic masculinity, and by extension, the exaggerated masculinity that Spike and Jet are performing, place this kind of expectation of heartlessness that these men should have in order to succeed as men in this world. But that's not who these guys are. When push comes to shove, in a lot of moments, Spike and Jet decide to put down the tough guy act and show kindness to those around them.
そうか。残りは旦那に。 二日酔いで困ってるだろうからプレーリーオイスターをおごるよ
A lot of it may seem unclear as to why until around episode 10 of the show, when Jet finds out about the whereabouts of his girlfriend, Alyssa, who ran out on him on one rainy night. Jet finds her not looking to get her back or to fight her new boyfriend, but for one simple reason.
俺はただ知りたかったあの時お前がいなくなったわけよ
It's one of the first moments of true vulnerability and uncertainty that we see in the show. At least from Jet. From this moment onward, he's no longer the stubborn captain of the Bebop trying to keep his partner reined in. Now Jet is painted as a somewhat regretful man, someone who clearly loved his girlfriend a lot. With this new contextualization of Jet and his home and his family, we as an audience have a greater understanding of his empathy and what he cares about in this world. By the time Jet goes chasing down the bounty on Alyssa's boyfriend, we already know what Jet wants out of all of this. He doesn't want her back, he doesn't want to fight her boyfriend. Well, one punch couldn't hurt. He has already got his answers. He just wants her safe. Jet is not the same person that he was in the past, even if that is undeniably a part of who he is. He is a bounty hunter, someone that Spike, Faye, and Ed rely on. He can't sit still for too long. Jet is continually negotiating with who he is and who he needs to be for those around him. Part of why he is able to walk away from this is because he knows that there is someone to protect Alyssa, someone who can care for her. But Spike and everyone else on the Bebop, well, they need him. There's a certain similarity to dual consciousness that Jet and Spike both face, both living in the past and present while somehow trying to plan for their future. Their past identities aren't something they want to share with one another, as doing so wouldn't function in their new migrant lifestyle. But no matter how much you try to ignore it, well, you're gonna carry that weight. Spike's story especially is heavily steeped in loss and regret about the past as he ultimately tries to escape his feelings from wanting to chase those memories. Spike is constantly balancing not talking or even thinking about his past to then jumping the second he hears Julia's name. Spike's past is something he has to constantly worry about. His framing over time from the show shifts from merely being a wanderer to a hunted exile whose fate had seemingly already been determined. Spike's first bout with Vicious, a former member of the Syndicate, is accompanied by organs and choir singing, with little dialogue to provide the details for why any of this is happening. And then, well... A nearly silent shootout that is only interrupted by bullets flying, bombs exploding, and blades clashing. The music cue, or rather the lack of one, makes it very clear that this isn't your typical Bebop fight scene. It probably isn't going to conclude with just a nice little lesson and a mostly happy ending. Spike isn't fighting as the carefree martial artist extraordinaire. He's using guns, grenades, and just general violence to get his way. Spike is no longer negotiating in the world through his identity as the migrant man that the audience has grown to know, but rather as the man who has lost the family and home he wanted to protect. As Spike is falling from the church, and no, not this abomination, we see Spike go through his cluttered memories of a life he once lived, accompanied by more choir singing. These memories mostly have had the color sucked out of them. The main color present is red, which can either paint the world in blood or roses. It's not completely devoid of color, but the motif of the redness is what Spike has painted his memories in. These strong emotional attachments related to his time in the Syndicate and the love he shared with Julia. And as these memories are occurring, they are intercutting with Spike's left eye, which he claims can see the past while his fake right eye can only see the present. This dichotomy of Spike that splits him right down the middle is something he has to battle throughout the entire series. When he awakens, he is no longer the past Spike. As he cracks a joke, we can only hope that things have been resolved by this unsettling demonstration of violence. It isn't until the Jupiter Jazz saga that we get to see Spike truly display his dichotomy once more. For the first time throughout the series, Spike shows what we could say is genuine anger, melancholy, and desperation.
おい死刑囚、おいジュリアはどこにいる？どこに行った？
ジュリアがいつも話してた。瞳の色が一つずつ違うって、そう言ってた。
Spike's past seems to be slowly encroaching onto him, attempting to correct his determined and fated death that he managed to escape. And look, to be honest, I am shocked Spike isn't already dead by now. Like, he makes a lot of mistakes. I would argue the whole crew of the Bebop makes more mistakes than bounties. Part of the journey of a migrant is the prevalence of making mistakes in unfamiliar situations but not letting them define you. Mistakes are usually at the crux of character moments and what defines character change and motivation. But Spike's character remains quite stable throughout most of the series as what I see as an intentional choice, because Spike sees himself as an inherently broken person. Spike has already defined who he is by his past mistakes and regrets. He believes Julia is the only way he can allow himself to move forward. Whether it's because she's someone he needs to protect or someone that can support him, it's clear that his masculinity is reliant on Julia being in his life. This form of masculinity that is predicated on protecting one's family is still founded in hegemonic masculinity, but has molded and reformed to fit Spike. Spike's life without her has mostly been in stasis, awaiting the day for the reunion. Spike's reunion is ultimately short-lived, just like Julia, as what seemed to be inevitable from the start happens right in front of Spike as an undeniable truth. With nothing to chase anymore, Spike is given the option to stay with the Bebop, to change who he is, and to become a new person. But well...
どこ行くの？なんで行くの？いつかあんた言ったわよね。過去なんてどうでもいいって。あんたの方が過去に縛られてる。
この目を見ろ。事故でなくして片っぽは作り物だ。その時から俺は片方の目で過去を見て、もう一方で今を見てた。目に見えてるものだけが現実じゃない、そう思ってた。
そんな話しないで。身の上話なんかしたことないくせに、今そんな話しないでよ。
覚めない夢でも見てるつもりだったんだ。いつの間にか覚めちまってた。
私、記憶戻ったの。でもいいことなんて何にもなかった。帰る場所なんてどこにもなかった。ここしか帰る場所がなかった。それなのに、どこ行くの？なんで行くの？わざわざ命を捨てに行くってわけ？
死にに行くわけじゃない。俺が本当に生きてるかどうか確かめに行くんだ。
That isn't who Spike is. Cowboy Bebop provides an incredibly pessimistic outlook on the life of migrants who are incapable of escaping their past. They are gonna carry that weight. Their burdens and trauma are inescapable, whether that's the mafia, their family, or their memories. You are gonna carry that weight. Spike's departure from the Bebop may have seemed like a choice, but ultimately, Spike has staked his life on hoping that he was gonna be reunited with Julia. He luckily escaped the syndicate, and for him, it was seemingly for one purpose: to be with her. Without Julia, he can't find a place to go. Spike can only see the past. His fake right eye can't see the present, but those around him can't ascertain that. The color in Spike's life has been sucked away once more. Despite having the chance to rebuild a life with Faye, Jet, and the others on the Bebop, Spike can't envision that sort of home for himself. It's a pessimistic perspective of migrant men, I know, but Cowboy Bebop made this pretty clear from the start. Many of the individual episodes in Bebop deal with the past slowly catching up to the present and the inevitability of time and fate. Cowboy Bebop just shows that Spike is no exception. Yes, Spike is reckless, inconsiderate, and stupid. But without having something to chase or protect, Spike just doesn't have a goal for who he wants to be anymore. The lack of change in Spike is ultimately what leads to his downfall. The inability to adapt, to see the possibilities, it's what makes his exaggerated masculinity non-functional. It's weak and fragile, and it's too deeply modeled after the hegemonic masculinity that has defined the downfall of many others. Hegemonic masculinity isn't only an oppressive force that harms women and children, but something which also controls the lives of men who can't fit its mold. Spike is just the next victim of that, chasing an exaggerated masculinity that ultimately ends up killing him. Spike fails to negotiate his masculinity in any meaningful way. Unlike Jet, who gives up his past for protecting the present he has around him, Spike carries his burdens to his grave. This example of the fatal flaws of exaggerated masculinity is essential for understanding why migrant men need to have a negotiated masculinity in order to live. While Cowboy Bebop's exaggerated masculinity is something I struggle to relate to, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once's entire premise and identity is something that I relate to way too much. Seriously, after watching over 20 years of media that wasn't about me, to then being forced to watch over 2 hours of cinema that seemed to know my deepest and darkest secrets, and put them on display for the world to see. This film was certainly a lot. I'm going to avoid talking about all of that since, well, I could talk about it forever, and just focus on the most essential migrant man in this film, Waymond. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is centered around the Wangs, a Chinese-American family who owns a struggling laundromat filled with strained family relationships. Waymond exists at a particularly interesting intersection when it comes to masculinity, as he is both a migrant as well as an Asian man. Since we've already peeked a bit at the migrant stuff, I want to focus in on Waymond's Asianness as it plays an instrumental role in understanding the struggles he faces at this particular intersection. Throughout my studies of migrant men, I came across Big Little Man by Alex Tizon. As much as it is a personal reflection of Tizon's life, it also explores the struggles and turmoils with masculinity that many Asian men face. Throughout his memoir, Tizon highlights how Asian men are often seen as less desirable partners for women, and a lot of the ideologies surrounding the insufficiencies of Asian men in height and other places. One of the prime examples of this, listed in the novel, was with Jeremy Lin and Linsanity, a seemingly unknown Chinese player succeeding in a full-contact, high-testosterone American sport wasn't something seen very often and wasn't necessarily welcomed. Look, this isn't ping pong, a sport that is relegated to Asian men. This was basketball, a sport dominated by both white and black men. So, when Jeremy Lin beat the Los Angeles Lakers and Kobe Bryant, a symbol of the overbearing masculine mentality, Jason Whitlock, an American sports journalist, tweeted, "Some lucky lady in New York City is gonna feel a couple inches of pain tonight." Was that necessary? No. Well, yes and no. No, because it is obviously racist, but understanding the racial dynamics in the context of masculinity, a black American journalist would go out of his way to make this type of comment because of the line which Jeremy Lin is seemingly crossing. Lin is exuding a type of hegemonic masculinity that typically isn't reserved for Asian men, at least in Western media. Asian men are often associated with other types of masculine archetypes that somewhat align with hegemonic standards. It could be the martial artist like Bruce Lee, the welterweight boxer Manny Pacquiao, or just a slight alteration of hegemonic masculinity in Simu Liu. I'm not here to break down how these archetypes function, but just know that this is the type of masculinity Asian men are expected to perform. Jeremy Lin crossed that line into a space where he wasn't welcomed, and he was reminded of that. So now that we have established these ideas, let's reflect on how they relate to Waymond.
Evelyn, you have to see Rick dance. Look, he knows all of the moves.
Waymond is the exact opposite of what hegemonic masculinity demands of a man. A nerdy-looking, short man who is just bossed around by his wife and is seemingly quite unreliable. His main fault in the hegemonic masculine model is his inability to command respect, but his lame jokes and fanny packs certainly don't help him either. The film then immediately juxtaposes him with Alpha Waymond, a Waymond from a completely different universe. He's demanding, quick thinking, and just straight up badass. Alpha Waymond has slotted himself into the proper masculine archetype of every Asian man knows kung fu, and has provided validation for Waymond's masculinity. If I didn't know who created this film or what this film was about, I would be quick to be judgmental at this scene. To think that someone as soft-spoken and kind as Waymond is seemingly desired to be replaced by this Alpha Waymond that Evelyn is confused by, but wants to be around, is unsettling. I mean, he is literally called Alpha Waymond. That's already a seemingly problematic type of masculinity we have going on. This Alpha Waymond is then tossed aside for some more plot things until we meet our next iteration of Waymond. Look, he doesn't have an official name or anything, so I'm just gonna stick with calling him Sigma Waymond. Sigma Waymond's appearance is clearly exuding another type of masculinity in this scene. He's wearing a dapper suit, changed out his glasses, smokes cigarettes, and seems taller? Sigma Waymond is exuding what I might call a James Bond archetype of masculinity. I sat with my advisor trying to think of a better alternative, but no, that's the best example I have. This masculinity is about becoming a refined yet capable man who keeps his emotions folded in with his handkerchief. In this timeline, Sigma Waymond is not married to Evelyn. Their interactions are filled with awkward stutters and miscommunications. Both of them seem happy with all that they have now. Something just feels off though. After pulling Evelyn aside, the first thing Waymond asks her is,
你觉得我很软弱是吗？多年前，我们刚开始谈恋爱的时候，你爸总是觉得我的心太软。也许当时他是对的。
The first thing put into question is Waymond's masculinity. He reflects on his sweetness being a negative as it's juxtaposed with a begging Waymond in reality. A Waymond who is lost, confused, just like everyone else. In this moment, Waymond stakes his identity on something very important that has been absent throughout all of the film: kindness.
这我明白。你和我都在这个地球上活了这么久了。 I know you're all fighting because you're scared and confused. I'm confused too. All day. I don't know what the heck is going on. But somehow, it feels like it's all my fault. 我总是看到事情好的一面，那不是因为我天真。 而是必要，而需要，这也就是我的生存之道。I don't know. The only thing I do know is that we have to be kind. Please, be kind. Especially when we don't know what's going on. 我理解，但你不是一个服输的人，我又何尝不是？只是我们选择的处理方式不一样。
He details the interiority of his optimism not as ignorance, but as strength. He focuses on kindness and protecting his loved ones at the center of his masculinity. He doesn't know what he has to do, or how he can be better. Waymond is currently in the act of negotiating his masculinity, finding out who he is and what works for him. It's how he learned how to survive. The Sigma Waymond, the one that many might adore or say is stronger and cooler than this regular Waymond, he's the one who doesn't get Evelyn's love. While other men may fight through business, debates, or physically, this regular old Waymond fights with kindness. And as all the happy memories of Waymond come flowing back to Evelyn, I think Evelyn also realizes that this is the man she fell in love with. Not the martial artist, and not the James Bond. This is the Waymond that helped save the laundromat. The one that can help fix Evelyn's problems. The one that fights alongside Evelyn, and reminds her she is not alone. As an immigrant, Waymond and his family are incredibly vulnerable. As I mentioned, immigration is one of the greatest stressors a home can face. They are poor, they are othered, and they aren't often treated with kindness. If Waymond were to have been just another hegemonic or exaggerated masculine man, he wouldn't be able to take on the world, but instead, he predicates his masculinity on kindness and protecting his loved ones, choosing to not fight alone. Many young boys are told growing up that they need to be strong and not show weakness, often leaving many men growing up bottling up things and fighting things on their own. Migrant men are especially vulnerable to this, as you saw with Spike in Cowboy Bebop. To choose love, to be seen as a weak male archetype, to be rejected by your loved ones until they are pushed to the very edge, that's hard. The mythology that toxic and hegemonic masculinity is purely a choice that men make to assert their dominance is incredibly harmful. The ideas of hegemonic masculinity are often enforced and pressured onto young men by many people, their family, their peers, their authority figures, and yes, even the women and girls in their lives. It's modeled by male idol figures, reinforced by media, and punished when not taken after. It takes effort to get out of that cycle. That effort often manifests as mistakes. It's difficult to learn to negotiate one's masculinity on your own. For the migrant man, whatever journey he may be on serves as the training grounds for understanding what his form of negotiated masculinity needs to be for them to feel validated. That journey is often filled with failure, and there is no better journey of failure to look at than Prince Zuko's in Avatar The Last Airbender. Prince Zuko, son of the Fire Lord, the banished prince, and quite literally the face of evil for the larger part of Avatar The Last Airbender.
It's just that for so long now, whenever I would imagine the face of the enemy, it was your face.
My face. I see.
Zuko's identity, and more so his perceived identity, are vital for understanding who he is. It is something that is ever evolving and something that deals greatly with the many things that he has lost.
My honor, my throne, my country. I'm about to lose them all.
As an exile, someone who was forcefully banished from his home, regret, denial, and loss are things that become an unforgettable stain on Zuko's life. This wasn't his choice. In fact, it was the choice of his father, Ozai, the male authority of the Fire Nation, and more importantly Zuko's life, that told him he was unworthy of being his son and a member of the Fire Nation. Zuko's entire life up until this point has been defined by one mistake. A moment where he spoke out of turn. A sign of disrespect to his father and his country. A mark in the form of a scar placed onto him in an Agni Kai with family. As overly dramatic and tragic as it may seem, this is not something that history is unfamiliar with. Mass persecution of people of certain groups can be seen as incredibly similar to the experience of exiles in Zuko. Looking even further back in history, there are many tales about the exile needing to complete a journey in order to regain their honor.
Honor. Honor. My honor. My honor. My honor.
Honor. Something that is impossible to fully define, but is essential for many of us to function. The words pride, destiny, and masculinity can work interchangeably with honor, so I'm going to look at Zuko's honor and masculinity through that lens. By the start of Avatar The Last Airbender, Zuko's masculinity has already been questioned, broken, and shamed. But what's more important is that his path to regaining his honor has already been laid out in front of him, by the Father Lord himself. With his path clearly laid out for him, Zuko pushes forward without a doubt in his mind that he is on the right path. As easy as it may be as the audience to judge him of, oh, clearly he is bad guy, from the bad guy team, doing bad guy things, and just another toxic male being toxically male. Zuko's identity is much more complicated than that. He is the son of the Fire Lord, the banished prince. To everyone who knows who he is, one thing is clear. They don't know him as Zuko.
Hello, Zuko here.
No matter where he goes, everyone has something to say about him because, well, he is the face of the enemy.
No, I hate you.
He is more than just himself. And I know that probably is not worded eloquently and might seem obvious, but really, the son of the Fire Lord is more than just Zuko. His lot in life was picked for him before he was born. Who he was supposed to be, what he was supposed to achieve, and how he was supposed to behave. All of that was predetermined, decided, before the name Zuko even came into anyone's mind. Something I know all too well. Avatar The Last Airbender makes it painfully clear about Zuko that it was impossible for him to just be a good person. As someone whose life was painted by gifted kid syndrome and had a lot of importance placed on my last name, this was something incredibly relatable to me. I know that Avatar The Last Airbender isn't technically Asian media, and is probably more Asian-influenced media, but Zuko and many other characters of the show were the first things I saw in media that seemed to be like me. As opposed to the stereotypical and token Asian characters in mostly white media, these were characters I could relate to and understand as a kid. On a fundamental level, Zuko's problems are something many men face in their own ways. One of the biggest issues many men face is that their identity is reliant on hegemonic masculinity, which is being imposed onto them by outside forces. Zuko doesn't just chase after the Avatar, the last hope of the world, because he's inherently a bad or toxic person. He's doing it because he fails to fulfill his given destiny otherwise. He has to do this in order to be a man, and as easy as it may be to say, just reject that broken identity, just be a better person. It takes time to recognize one's faults, and then you have to figure out how to fix them. And the hardest part is giving up the things that went along with your old identity you are now tossing aside. Sure, Zuko's family is horrible and could potentially cause the end of the world, but to completely forsake one's family, one's nation, one's home, all for the sake of being a better person, that takes resolve, time, and support. Things Zuko doesn't have at the start of the show. It feels unfair that he has to just give all of this up. I know it felt unfair to me. It's so easy to see an angry, aggressive teenager who is yelling around orders to just be another malicious abuser of the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, and other broken systems. Even the show itself questions why Zuko behaves the way he does.
I'm sick of taking his orders, and I'm tired of chasing his avatar. I mean, who does Zuko think he is?
Avatar The Last Airbender defines Zuko's problems and gives them a framework. Even if we don't agree or fully empathize with what Zuko is going through, we understand it. That's a luxury most migrant men aren't given. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that we should let people act with toxic masculinity and just say, oh, let's try to be understanding. It's more about understanding the root causes and influences that motivate one to exude that toxic masculinity that is essential here. That knowledge, that ability to identify it, is the first step to negotiated masculinity in trying to fix one's identity. One of the most important resources young men need to avoid the path of toxic masculinity is a role model who doesn't exude the typical traits of toxic masculinity. For Zuko, this was his uncle Iroh, a man who has been shamed by his nation and deemed the greatest military failure in Fire Nation history. Despite being one of the most well-written characters in Western animation and being a large part of forming many of my morals, I'm choosing to frame Iroh like this because at the start of the show, this is exactly how Zuko views his uncle, solely through the harsh lens of results, because that is exactly how his father evaluated him, permanently. This is often how masculinity is assessed, as some sort of size competition. Iroh is an incredible firebender who is a loving father and is a respected member of an international organization of masters, but he have failed to assert his dominance over Ba Sing Se, the Earth Nation's capital, and he betrayed his nation by putting his feelings for his family before his country. Now, the military is probably the most egregious example of toxic masculinity, and Last Airbender makes sure that it puts that toxic masculinity on full display throughout the show.
Thanks for your contribution. The army appreciates your support. You better leave town. Penalty for staying's a lot steeper than you can afford, stranger. Trust me.
Those soldiers are supposed to protect us from the Fire Nation, but they're just a bunch of thugs.
As I've stated repeatedly, at the start of the show, Zuko is kind of a bad person despite having enough resources to change. He has a good role model, his flaws get exposed often, and he is filled with lots of twisted up emotions that provide good motivation for him. But that's not what gets someone to change, to negotiate their masculinity. Even migrant men who face great adversity will try to emulate some amount of hegemonic masculinity based on certain ideals until they are faced with enough struggles that makes them question their resolve. Basically, they need to fail. A lot. They need to make mistakes, even through small victories, and do it all on their own. Zuko isn't going to change because Iroh tells him to. That's not how people grow. They have to face reality for themselves. It takes Zuko nearly dying, being replaced by his more talented sister, and becoming a full-on refugee before he even considers changing who he is. Because you know why?
I'm surprised, Prince Zuko. Surprised that you are not at this moment trying to capture the Avatar.
I'm tired.
Then you should rest. A man needs his rest.
He's tired of not getting what he wants. Something isn't working with who he is. Most of Season 2 is spent on Zuko questioning, denying, and reconfiguring who he is. In Season 2, Episode 7, titled Zuko Alone, we see Zuko finally detached from everything that has been controlling his life. The Fire Nation, his uncle, his family, and his honor. His honor is far gone in a way.
Not enough here for a hot meal. I can get you 2 bags of feed.
As Zuko wanders into the small Earth Nation town that is being bullied by soldiers, he is able to offer strength to those around him, and a welcoming family even encourages him to stay, potentially offering him a new way of living. He has the ability to mentor someone and protect a new land. Zuko reflects a lot on his childhood and who he is during this episode, and it really emphasizes the nature of his inescapable past. What it really means to be the banished prince, the son of the Fire Lord, the face of the enemy. All of this makes it painfully clear that the person we think is the epitome of evil is a lot more complex than the narrative we might expect out of a typical kid show. All of this hurt, all of this trauma, it defines who he is no matter how hard he tries to escape it. As he confronts the Earth Nation soldiers at a Sunset Western showdown, a typical home for exuding masculinity, Zuko tries to show off his new identity as a rogue refugee who protects those who need it, someone who isn't a firebender. And while he does great in fending off many of the other soldiers, when faced with true power and adversity, Zuko comes to a realization.
Remember this, Zuko. No matter how things may seem to change, never forget who you are.
Zuko's mother, his one solace in his family and in his country, her last words to him are what he chooses to stake himself on. This aggressive, violent display of destructive firebending paints him as a monster, but that's who he is. Someone with great power, capable of great violence.
My name is Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai, Prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne.
He is Zuko, the banished prince. As much as Zuko tries to pretend he isn't someone from the Fire Nation, whether that is because he's filled with shame, pain, or regret, he cannot deny that is who he is. It would have been so much easier for him to choose to be a nobody, someone whose past and identity were lost to time. But Zuko's strength, the one he gets from within, from his mother and his uncle, that's the one that was born from the Fire Nation, one that he can't forget. But that comes at a cost. He is hated, he is rejected, and he feels that same pain all over again. So Zuko still just can't give up his Fire Nation ways. While he's no longer going full nameless Earth Nation refugee, he's stuck in a state of limbo. As Zuko enters Ba Sing Se with his uncle, he's presented with the opportunity to finally restart his dream of capturing the Avatar by taking his bison, Appa. This goal seemed lost to him after his sister Azula had practically taken his dream away from him by usurping his mission. So he desperately tries to take control of the situation, hoping that maybe this one time it will work out. As Zuko runs aimlessly into the room, he's not met by guards, the Avatar, or even Azula, but by the one person who can truly stop his planless plan, Iroh.
Uncle? So, the Blue Spirit. I wonder who could be behind that mask.
What are you doing here?
I was just about to ask you the same thing. What do you plan to do now that you have found the Avatar's bison? Keep it locked in our new apartment? Should I go put on a pot of tea for him?
First, I have to get it out of here.
And then what? You never think these things through. This is exactly what happened when you captured the Avatar at the North Pole. You had him, and then you had nowhere to go.
I would have figured something out.
No! If his friends hadn't found you, you would have frozen to death.
I know my own destiny, Uncle.
Is it your own destiny? Or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?
Stop it, Uncle. I have to do this.
I'm begging you, Prince Zuko. It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
Zuko has been battling his inner turmoil, but never truly questioning or understanding it. It isn't until Iroh lays it out so clearly to him that he begins to challenge who he is. Zuko has been failing to become the person he was told he has to be. After this, Zuko enters a very non-Zuko state. Someone who is happy, optimistic, and seemingly wants the best out of life. And once again, Zuko is reminded that he can't escape who he is. The Season 2 finale, The Crossroads of Destiny, is One of the most tightly packed and well-directed pieces of television I have ever seen, but all you need to know from it is that Zuko chooses to go back to his old ways and team up with Azula to capture, or rather kill, the Avatar. This sets up Zuko to have everything he ever wanted at the start of the final season. He's got his father's love, his girlfriend, his honor. Everything should be right in Zuko's world, right? Well, Zuko has these feelings that tell him something is wrong. For the past few years, Zuko has been on a journey where his life was nothing like this. His father's love was an aspiration, not a reality he experienced. Zuko has seen the real world, what the Fire Nation has done, and what the Avatar is doing. He isn't stupid, and he isn't ungrateful. During his time in the Fire Nation, Zuko visits the now imprisoned Iroh several times with mixed emotions of both anger and regret.
You brought this on yourself, you know. We could have returned together. You could have been a hero. You have no right to judge me, Uncle. I did what I had to do in Ba Sing Se, and you're a fool for not joining me. You're not going to say anything? You're a crazy old man! You're crazy! And if you weren't in jail, you'd be sleeping in a gutter! Forget it! I'll solve this myself! Waste away in here for all I care!
You see, Zuko's journey was not supposed to be answered by some end result of him coming home that fixes his problems, but by his own individual choices. Up until this point, it's fair to question whether Zuko has truly made any of his own choices as an individual. He has only made the choices of a banished prince. Zuko is working with multiple consciences now, as many migrant men often experience. He is no longer just Zuko, son of the Fire Lord, but also Zuko, the former refugee, Zuko, the captain of a crew, and Zuko, the occasional savior of the Avatar. Migration is a very complicated and twisted experience, especially as an exile like Zuko. Zuko was never going to be the same person he was before he left on his journey. So despite him achieving the goal he set out when he first got banished, that's no longer the same goal he has now. He never realized it until he truly internalized his betrayal of his uncle and the true state of the world. In Season 3, Episode 5, The Beach, Zuko and the rest of the Fire Nation crew spill out many of the most painful insecurities and issues that honestly just defines who they are as people. Zuko's answer is one that paints his perspective incredibly clear.
For so long I thought that if my dad accepted me, I'd be happy. I'm back home now, my dad talks to me. He even thinks I'm a hero. Everything should be perfect, right? I should be happy now. But I'm not. I'm angrier than ever and I don't know why.
There's a simple question you need to answer then. Who are you angry at?
No one. I'm just angry.
Yeah. Who are you angry at, Zuko?
Everyone. I don't know.
Is it Dad?
No.
Your uncle? Me?
No.
Then who? Who are you angry at?
Answer the question, Zuko.
Talk to us.
Come on, answer the question.
Come on, answer it.
I'm angry at myself!
Why?
Because I'm confused. Because I'm not sure I know the difference between right and wrong anymore.
Zuko finally comes to the realization that, well, maybe he isn't happy with who he is and the decisions he has made. That maybe some sort of dissonance still exists in him now. That spending several years away from his home might change how he feels during his long-awaited return. And like all types of masculinity, these feelings often amount into rage. Inexplicable rage. If Zuko were some other hegemonic male, I'm sure he would take out his anger on someone else. He's done so verbally in the past. But Zuko has had a lot of time to reflect. He's allowed himself to see his own mistakes and realize that no amount of anger really changes that. He's learned that fighting the way his father does is not the way he wants to be anymore. Because if he does that, he will just continue the cycle of hate, maintaining hegemonic masculinity. But Zuko's negotiated masculinity, that starts now. These events and feelings lead to the final mid-season special, the Day of Black Sun, when Zuko finally confronts his father.
I'm here to tell the truth.
Telling the truth during the middle of an eclipse. This should be interesting.
For many men with problematic relationships with their fathers, there is no greater moment in their lives than when they decide to truly confront and challenge their father figure. Even though this challenge begins as a conversation, you have to understand the cultural importance of this for Zuko. Zuko was banished from his nation for speaking out against a nameless military leader. Respect, etiquette, and knowing one's place, that is what Zuko's childhood was centered around and ruined by. He has the scar to prove it. So for him to finally defy his father, even only verbally, that is huge. Breaking down the lies, wrongdoings, and pain Ozai caused, it's an incredibly cathartic moment to finally stand up and say something during the business meeting with a stranger who shares your last name. To feel like he's heard, or at least able to speak, that's one of the many things Zuko never had, that I never had.
Think again. I am going to speak my mind, and you are going to listen.
And as this pleasant conversation comes to a close, Zuko and his father have a violent confrontation.
Now I realize that banishment is far too merciful a penalty for treason. Your penalty will be far steeper.
Fighting his own way, like his uncle. This is something Avatar The Last Airbender does exceptionally well, having bending and fighting styles be more than just mere spectacle, to be about a person's ideology, their emotional state. I've highlighted already a few times throughout the video, but this type of expression is so important for understanding masculinity in detail. But this action shows Zuko is choosing to help restore balance to the world, to no longer fight with brute force, to run away when it's necessary. Zuko now finds himself on a new journey, to join the Avatar and help restore balance to the world, though that's not without its own struggles. It's not like the Aang gang just suddenly forgot about all the terrible things Zuko did. One of the greatest hurdles for most men who try to move away from hegemonic masculinity is recognizing that their actions are not necessarily going to be forgiven despite their change in mindset. Zuko spends the final several episodes of Season 3 to prove that he has changed and earns the individual trust of the other main characters. His new perspective really provides a lot of depth in this final arc of Avatar The Last Airbender, and is honestly what makes the show so incredible. Zuko's final task during the series finale is to fight Azula, something he has been doing his entire life. An Agni Kai with family, back to where it all started. He goes along with Katara, the person who has been most suspicious and hurt by him throughout the show, to prove his worth and ideology. The final Agni Kai is set up with a lot of depth, with many themes of trust, family, and friendship. It's a chance for Zuko to finally fix his home, to set things right. It's an incredible display of animation, music, and emotion that rings true to the grandiose nature of intra-family fighting. But once again, Zuko's final choice, his way of fighting, is the way his uncle taught him, protecting the ones he loves and cares about. For Zuko, self-sacrifice was unimaginable throughout the entire show. His honor was the most important thing to him. To not only protect, but to choose to lose against the person who has been antagonizing him his whole life, that is a conscious step away from hegemonic masculinity. Zuko's values of masculinity have shifted greatly away from achievement, power, and honor. Zuko has journeyed his way around the world to form his own negotiated masculinity that revolves around protecting his newfound home and the ones who gave him a second chance. To potentially sacrifice all of that to lose once again in another Agni Kai against family, it's an act that puts on display how much growth Zuko has had throughout the entire show. These migrant men have all constantly battled trying to negotiate their own masculinity. For some with more success than others, and others needing more time. For me, seeing male characters that seem truly lost with who they are was incredibly powerful, especially because to them, home was something very complicated. For Spike, it was the unforgettable memories of Julia that ended up being a burden that he carried to his grave. Waymond's dysfunctional household became unstable and unkind as it moved from China to America and faced the struggles of being immigrants, and Zuko, his home was stained by traumatic memories and unrealistic standards that, even when he returned home, something just didn't seem right. It's so easy to get caught up watching The Wizard of Oz, E.T., or other mainstream media and think, of course they just want to return home. We inherently make assumptions about our protagonists, and their relationship with their homes is one of them. And as I've stated throughout the entire video, a man's masculinity is predicated on their relationship with their home as a place to protect. Negotiated masculinity is about finding an identity and a purpose that fits one's new way of living. Some people choose to do it, and others have to do it, like the migrant men in this video. Negotiated masculinity is not a perfect concept. I don't have all the details worked out on what exactly defines it. All I know is that there is a process that men go through when they feel like they aren't fitting the mold of hegemonic masculinity. Men feel invalidated when they don't hold up to the standards set up by society. I felt invalidated by the standard. Understanding that hegemonic masculinity doesn't just come from men, but from a larger system as a whole, is important to understanding why it exists. Like I've said, it isn't just about toxic men being toxic men. It's patterned, it's practice, and it's a process. You can predict it. Mostly. Lacking a positive relationship with one's home is one of the many shortcomings men may feel that invalidates them and forces them to negotiate their masculinity. And as you've seen throughout the video, that process isn't necessarily pretty and doesn't always end positively. If you want, you can look at other pieces of media that involve a form of negotiated masculinity for migrant men that don't fit the hegemonic mold. Shows like The End of the Fucking World, Mob Psycho 100, or even March Comes In Like a Lion. The term migrant here doesn't necessarily fit all these men, but if you really stretch the idea, it does. Regardless, in all of these shows, you will find the same or similar process of negotiating masculinity and redefining one's home with these characters. I'm sure I'll talk about all of them at some point. This video has many flaws and shortcomings that I wish could be solved, but as a school project with a certain deadline, only so many things can be done. For example, this video is reliant on the gender binary and many standard gender roles being assumed. Trust me, I am fully aware of how problematic that is, but in the world we live right now, it seems to be the case. As long as people on Twitter are using the term toxic masculinity, we are probably still functioning in a gender binary. Secondly, this assumption of a relationship with home is mainly based on men's social responsibility to protect one's family, aka women and children. Protecting children is obviously less problematic, but protecting women surely is an issue. And yeah, this is also an assumption of heteronormativity. It's a complicated issue of standard gender roles and is different from person to person. Men should clearly not think that women exist for the sake of being protected, and I think most of the men in this video realize that. And yeah, this video also still relies on some amount of hegemonic masculinity because at the end of the day, negotiated masculinity still needs affirmation from the standard, just like any other standard. I just wanted to point out how these men chose to form their own archetypes that were less harmful and more personal to them so that they felt good about it and weren't being dicks. Look, at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway from this video that I want you to make is that we shouldn't make assumptions about the home being a positive place for people. It's often complicated. As the second son of a first-generation Asian American family, that wasn't the case for me. It's a different type of battle with societal expectations and hegemonic masculinity than is often shown in mainstream media. We are men who have to learn to stop carrying that weight, be kind, and regain our honor. Men are subjected to the abuses of hegemonic masculinity just like everyone else. Most of us are confused in trying to figure things out. Who am I? And what do I want? These are hard things to think about when home isn't a safe place to be. Home isn't just a good or bad place. It's a concept riddled with many mixed feelings and obligations. It's not just about staying or leaving, but negotiating one's purpose and relationship with their home that is healthy and safe. At the very least, that's been my negotiated masculinity. Thanks for watching. Hey, long time no upload. So, I've been busy with school for like the past year or whatever, and this was actually my final project to graduate. It's a weird feeling. I've posted on Twitter about it, but now that I'm graduated, hopefully this leaves some time for some video essaying while I'm looking for a job. If any of you have job opportunities for screenwriters or anything of the sort, please let me know. I am desperate. This video took a lot out of me. While the Queen's Gambit video was longer, it took 6 months, and to do something even somewhat close to that was a lot, and I only had about a month to do so. So I hope you can bear with the production issues and, you know, a lot of the recording is kind of whatever, but I think that overall the quality is good. I don't really engage with the theory as much as I would like in this video, and there's a lot of things I would do to improve it. It's just know that, again, this was my final project for school, and I really just wanted to get something out there and done with so I could graduate. I have around 6 or 7 video ideas I've been sitting on for a while and have like half-written scripts for a couple of them, and I hope to maybe get those out within like a, you know, some reasonable time in 2023. Video essaying is just really hard. I second guess myself a lot and I really am too much of a perfectionist with it, but I've learned that over time it's really more important to just get my word out there. I really would like to continue this as a hobby and really as a high effort hobby because most of my hobbies are high effort. I don't see myself doing anything really crazy with this. I don't want to make this a career. I don't want to do anything wild like that, but I just have a lot of really complicated ideas that I don't really know how to express in any other way besides video essay, so you might see some of those. I also plan on starting a blog at some point in 2023, so keep an eye out for that. I'll probably share it on Twitter or something. So yeah, give me a follow on Twitter. Hopefully I continue to do this. We'll see what happens. I really don't know. My life is really up in the air in the next 6 months, so that could mean a lot of video essays or absolutely none. Who knows? If you have, for some reason, followed me since the Queen's Gambit video, and you're like, wow, I can't believe he finally released another video, thank you a lot. So yeah, going into 2023, I have no idea what is going to happen, but hopefully I am able to release some video essays, but I also kind of hope to find a job. So yeah, we will see how that all goes. I will probably talk bullshit about it on Twitter or something if you really care. But yeah, thanks for watching.